guys, I'm Raquel. Welcome to my channel Out of the Past, where I talk about all things classic movies. And today I'm going to review the book My Last Sigh, the autobiography of Louis Buñuel. This was written by Louis Buñuel with his good screenwriter friend and frequent collaborator Jean-Claude Carrier, and this was translated by Abigail Israel. It was published in 1981, I believe, which was a couple of years before Louis Buñuel passed away. So this is quite a gem, especially if you're interested in Louis Buñuel, which I am. I'm a recent convert to his movies. I love how weird and surreal and wacky they are. So if you are interested in Louis Buñuel films, I highly recommend this memoir, and I'm going to be breaking down what I discovered reading it and what I think about it. Okay, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but so basically we're in Paris. The Spanish Civil War breaks out. He's like in the middle of making a movie. He had like returned from Paris and was in Spain, and he was in the middle of a making of a movie, and he had to get shut down because of the war that was erupting around him. So he had to flee Spain, and he didn't really return for many years. He's political in his book, but his political ideologies are kind of ambiguous. He always leaves room for doubt. Like, he was labeled a communist, but he wasn't a communist. Like, he was labeled a Republican, but he wasn't really a Republican. So he had very strong ideologies, but he also left room for interpretation and for doubt. So I thought that was interesting. So for a while he's actually working in Hollywood. So he left France, went to work for MGM, also worked for Paramount and Warner Brothers, dubbing English movies into Spanish. So that was his thing. It's funny because like at MGM he barely did any work. He talks about, getting a regular paycheck but really not showing up. He has this really funny story about like Irving Thalberg's right-hand man, whose name I'm forgetting right now, was like, "Hey, so what do you want to learn on set while you're working on MGM?" And he's like, "Shooting. I want to learn more about shooting." So he is invited to kind of watch behind the scenes of this Greta Garbo movie. And then Greta Garbo sees him staring at her, and she's like, "Who's this guy? Get him out of here." And then he was like, "Fine, I'm just gonna go home." And then he like doesn't come back to the lot. I thought that was really funny. So he has this like ongoing relationship with Hollywood that lasts for many years. But funny enough, he actually only made 2 movies in English, and they weren't for Hollywood. One film is Robinson Crusoe, or was it like The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, or just Robinson Crusoe? And then The Young One, which was much later in 1960. But all of his films were actually either in Spanish or French. He was fluent in both, and he learned English along the way. And fun fact too, he actually lived in New York for a while, and he programmed for the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, and he actually had to resign from his job because Dolly wrote this book and kind of threw him under the bus, and it was so scandalous that he was kind of forced to resign. So we learn about him moving to Mexico City, where he ends up living in Mexico for more than 30 years, like 36 years. He got his citizenship in 1949. Like, we think of him as a Spanish director who also made French films, but he actually made 20 Mexican films. And he doesn't think of these very highly. Like, he said he was kind of, desperate for money. He had 2 kids to raise, a wife to take care of. So he would just take jobs as they came. But one thing, though, is that he would not work on commercial films. If he did work on commercial films, he did not want his name to appear on credits. He'd be a producer, he'd help out, but it wouldn't be his film. So all of the films he did make in Mexico, none of them were commercial, and all of them had his kind of like personal stamp of morality. And one of the films, like I mentioned earlier, is The Criminal Life of Archibaldo de la Cruz. He also made Los Olvidados, lots of other movies in Mexico. He wasn't as proud of those, but it's just a really interesting part of his past. And then after that many years, he just went back to Spain and France to make more movies. Okay, I'll just read a couple of lines about his filmmaking style that I thought were pretty interesting. The first one is on his directing style. He writes, "I don't use any particular technique when I work. My direction depends entirely on how good the actors are, on what they suggest, or on the kind of effort I have to make if they're not suited for their roles. In any case, all direction depends on your personal vision, a certain something you feel strongly but can't always explain." And he also talks about naming his movies. Some of them, like for example, The Phantom of Liberty was actually a reference from a line in the Milky Way. The Exterminating Angel, which actually makes no sense for the film itself, but was actually the name of a play that one of his friends was going to write but never wrote. And he had heard at the Exterminating Angel and said, "Hey, if I ever saw that name on a marquee, I would go right in, get a ticket, and sit down and watch it because that sounds super interesting." And when his friend ended up not writing the play, he just took the name and added it to his movie. So about titles, he says, "In my search for titles, I've always tried to follow the old surrealist trick of finding a totally unexpected word or group of words which opens up a new perspective on a painting or a book." So in the book, he has actually a lot of really great stories about old Hollywood. When he made The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, that had an American premiere in Los Angeles, and it actually eventually went to win the Best Foreign Language Oscar. And he was invited by George Cukor to this luncheon where he met Alfred Hitchcock and Billy Wilder and John Ford and Robert Mamoulian and Robert Wise. Like all these amazing directors were there, and they had like this group photo. It was really fantastic. In fact, he actually was supposed to meet Fritz Lang, and Fritz Lang couldn't make it. So Fritz Lang invited him the next day. If you know me, I love Fritz Lang, and I also love Luis Buñuel. So hearing about them together is pretty amazing. And interesting thing about Luis Buñuel, he was trying to find what art form he wanted to get into, and it was Fritz Lang's film Destiny, and also a little bit like M and Metropolis, that convinced him to become a filmmaker. So it was like the inspiration and the kind of like apprentice meeting together. So that was a really cool story. And he shares stories about his attempts at working with other Hollywood types. He helped Dalton Trumbo on the screen play adaptation of Trumbo's novel Johnny Got His Gun, which is like one of my top favorite novels of all time. It was made into a movie. He only worked a little bit with Trumbo and made a few contributions to the screenplay, but even though he didn't end up working, very extensively with Dalton Trumbo, Trumbo still wanted to give him credit. And also, Woody Allen offered Luis Buñuel $30,000 to play himself, to play Luis Buñuel playing Luis Buñuel in Annie Hall, but that ended up not working out, but that would have been really fun. So there are a lot of really great stories. There are like a few major problems with the book. First is like the homophobia. There's several passages in which he's talking about either a friend who was gay, or he's talking about homosexuals in general in very derogatory terms, and it is like a sign of like, the culture he grew up in, but it's still kind of disheartening to read. And also there's some latent racism that pops up a couple times that's also very disheartening to read. Those are really tough passages to get through. And also, there would have been some really great explorations about, why he decided to criticize, the Catholic Church, or why he decided to criticize the bourgeoisie, especially when he grew up as a Catholic in the upper class of Spain. But it really doesn't go into that. So there are some downsides, but otherwise his personality really shines through. There's points where this book is really funny and really enlightening. And if you're a fan of his movies, especially his later works, which he refers to quite a lot, or if you're a fan of his two early surrealist um, movies, he mentions them throughout the book. It's really interesting, and especially the last few chapters, he really dives into his films, and that's really gratifying to read. So that's this book here, My Last Sigh, the autobiography of Louis Buñuel. I would love to hear from you. Have you read this book? Are you a Louis Buñuel fan? And if you are, which of his films are your favorites? Mine is The Exterminating Angel for sure. I did really like The Phantom of Liberty. Viridiana's really great. Disturbing, but really great. There's lots of really, really great films of his and some really strange ones, which I really like. So I would love to hear from you. What Louis Buñuel film do you like the most? Thank you for watching, and make sure you subscribe. I'll talk to you later. Bye.